Hey guys, what's up? It's been a long time, and like not a year, but almost a year. I mean, I don't even remember when was the last time I put in my last video, but I'm still here. I still want to, do these. Um, it was just a point. I was going through a lot of stuff in my life personally, and so I kind of took like a break. Didn't mean it for it to be 7 months, but a lot of things personally happened in my life that kind of affected me doing this consistently, and um, between that and just started a new job and working a lot and still working a lot, doing more than one thing. It's just been really, really hectic for me. So today, had a day off, and among the million other things I could be doing right now in my free time, I wanted to do this because I feel like I haven't done this in a while. I am a wrestling fan still. I still watch wrestling, even in this pandemic era. Which is really, really hard for a lot of people. Um, I'm still here. I'm still doing this. Um, so speaking of the pandemic era, we all know what's going on out there in the real world. Um, with everything that's going on concerning the pandemic, the virus, and whatnot. Um, I just want to talk about how it's affected wrestling, and these empty arena shows that WWE, Impact, AEW, and now New Japan is now uh, have done, or about to start. Well, they have done. They started like about a month ago. Last month they started up doing empty arena matches. Um, but still, point is that uh, this virus has affected the wrestling business in a dramatic way. One that I honestly haven't seen before as a wrestling fan. I have never seen. I think you know as a wrestling fan, or you could say a wrestling historian, whatever you want uh, to be in. If you were to say what were some of the most devastating moments that affected the overall industry, I would definitely say the end of the territory days when Vince McMahon, made WWE and took a lot of talent and everything else and pretty much killed the whole territory days. Um, the end of that era, um, the purchase and fall of WCW. I think that was another big blow for the industry that I don't think we ever really recovered from. In spite of AEW, now being in existence, and AEW is great. I really love that brand, but wrestling as a whole just never really fully recovered from the loss of another big major product like WCW. And now I can honestly say I think this pandemic thing could be a third thing we can add onto that list, as one of the great, damaging things that has happened to the wrestling world. Um, it really sucks because a lot of these companies and stuff, they're doing empty arena shows, and for as much as I've even complained to myself how some fans they're not interactive, or sometimes they act like dumbasses, and they don't cheer or respond to certain things. They're not really interactive. This guess is what I'm trying to say, for lack of a better word. Um, Now that we have no crowds like at all to make any type of noise, even the annoying what chants, kind of miss it. um, the wrestling audience is such a key ingredient to the overall wrestling package, for you, the viewer watching at home, that having that element be taken away for months, it kind of puts a damper on the overall product, and it kind of makes it unwatchable in certain cases. Granted, WWE has done other things to not really help that situation, but still, um, it really does make you, you know, take a look back and kind of look at things from a different perspective, as a wrestling fan. Um, I don't think, us having a live audience attendance, when we're going to get that back again, it's not going to be in 2020. I know been a lot of reports of events wanting to have some sort of fans, even if it's a small amount, um, come to for SummerSlam in like 2 weeks or whatever. Not gonna happen. Um, I honestly, even though life is kind of somewhat kind of getting back to normal, there's a new normal we have to go by now. I honestly don't think wrestling fans in a large attendance, where you're getting like the WrestleMania crowds, the weekly, you know, Raw, SmackDown, and AEW crowds. I honestly don't think we're gonna get that until like next year. And when I say next year, probably not until the summer. Like I can see this going on, the empty arena shows, until summer of 2021. And even in summer of 2021, I don't think it's going to be open the flood. I'd be surprised if it was open the floodgates and say, hey, okay, let's get 16,000 people packed for a night of Monday Night Raw. I think it's going to be in small increments. So we may still be getting Raw and SmackDown at the PC Center, but maybe with a smaller crowd. Which, if we get to that point, I probably wouldn't mind, because I think WWE is just so overproduced and everything, and they obsess a lot with having the large audience and large crowd. That if we kind of have a small, intimate audience of, like, say, NXT, but you put it under Raw and SmackDown for right now due to the circumstances that we're under due to this pandemic, I think it could kind of work and it'd be kind of interesting to see. However, despite that, the show must go on. These companies have to continue to keep moving on. So WWE has been putting on some shows, during this whole pandemic era. AEW has moved forward and putting on shows, and now also Impact. I can honestly say, of all these three shows, and also New Japan as well, like I said earlier, just started up a month ago. Granted, they're starting to let an audience come in, like 2,000, no more than 2,000 people, but like be heavily like spaced out. So it's still practically a near empty arena still. Hell, even basketball season just started up, and they're doing empty arena games because they have to. And the same thing that applies to the crowds being a part of the show, and just help the overall presentation. That not only affects wrestling, but that affects basketball. That's going to affect the NFL. You were saying that right now, it affects basketball, and it's going to affect baseball and everything else. So this goes for all kinds of sports. UFC's been kind of okay. You don't really mind it too much, because UFC is such the cameras are kind of tight anyway, so you're seeing two guys in the cage. You don't really pay too much attention to the audience that much, so UFC kind of gets away with it a little bit. But I mean, still, so as far as the wrestling companies goes, like I said, they've been making their shows. The show must go on. They've been continuing to air live or pre-tape shows, whatever. My thoughts on them. I'll start with WWE. WWE just has not. WWE has just not been good. It has not. I literally have not watched a full episode of Raw or SmackDown since March. A full episode. And I have this shit recorded on my DVR. Every week. It's set. And I don't watch a full episode. I don't. For Raw, I watch whatever segments or match Drew McIntyre's in, because I think they've been booking Drew McIntyre pretty well, as best they can, in spite of this pandemic. And then like I watch like other than then like on SmackDown, I'll watch AJ Styles segment match, or what's his name, Matt Riddle, debut or whatever. Other than that, Raw and SmackDown catches me on the highlight reel. Um, it's a lot of people have turned away from WWE because they feel like the pandemic and everything is just so hard to watch, and I definitely agree. It is a challenge to watch a wrestling show. However, it's not just that; it's the storylines. The storylines in WWE have not been good. Not to say that they have been golden and great when Paul Heyman was booking Raw. There were some things that I enjoyed that Paul Heyman did for Raw, as part of creative, and other things I did not. However, when he got fired from that position and Pritchard, took over the booking for Raw and SmackDown simultaneously, Raw just sunk to a new low. And they've been sinking to a new low every week for the past several weeks, where Raw's hitting like 1.7 million views, 1.5 million views. They're hitting TNA numbers. Remember when people used to always laugh and say, "Hey, TNA, is they only make a million views, or they only make 1.5 million views, or 1.2, somewhere around there. They don't get any higher. They just stagnant. Just keep those numbers." Well, guess what? Raw's hitting those numbers now. It is what it is. Raw's hitting those numbers, and the storylines just have not been that great. And like I said, I know the audience is a big part of it, but the storyline itself is really... WWE are running out of excuses. They're running out of excuses. That's all. That's all it is. When wrestling fans have been saying for so long, you got to change something with your storyline. The storyline is it's not great. It's kind of sucky. And WWE just fell on deaf ears, and they just kept doing what they were doing. Just kept doing what they were doing. Just kept doing what they're doing. Now that we're in the middle of a pandemic, there's no audience, which I can say at that point, there's no, as a viewer watching the TV, there's no distractions. So you're actually seeing this shit like raw, okay? Pun intended. You're seeing it raw. You're seeing it unfiltered, pretty much. Hell, the investors call that Vince McMahon had last week. A lot of investors pointed out in articles talking about the very thing I'm saying right now. WWE storylines, their lack of making new stars. It's catching up to them. It's biting them in the ass. They didn't say that exactly, but in layman's terms, this is what quite a few investors were saying coming out of this conference call from Vince McMahon that he just had a week ago. If investors are saying this, fans that have been saying this for the last 5 to 6 years ain't saying it just to be bullshitting. Or just to be, WWE hater. You're just a hater of WWE. It is what it is. WWE can be an enjoyable product. They have, Jesus Christ, a plethora of talent. From the main roster to NXT, they have talent. They have people that can become stars. They have people that can carry the torch and carry the company into the future. The problem is they are creatively bankrupt. And they have been creatively bankrupt for a long, long, long time. And now that we're in this pandemic and everything, WWE are out of excuses. They have no other choice. The cat's out of the bag. That's why they came up with this shit, Raw Underground. And look, I'm all for trying something new. Go for it. But at the same token, and you trying something new, be expected to have some criticism coming your way, whether it be positive, negative, or just constructive criticism. That Raw Underground stuff was shit. I'm sorry. That was horrible. I can let it play out as a wrestling fan and watch it and see how it develops, but I'm telling you right now, if that idea, Raw Underground, lasts longer than 2 to 3 months, I will be baffled. Because that just did not click. That was horrible. Absolutely horrible. And at the end of the day, the only man that we can really blame is Vince McMahon. Is Vincent Kennedy McMahon. Everyone plays to, they all write the show, make the show for the audience of one. And that audience of one is Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon, I will give him credit where it is due. He has taken his father's company that was a territory, and he has made it a monopoly, a wrestling monopoly. He has beaten out his competition in being WCW. He has garnered some of the best talent in the world. He has under his brand throughout the years, past and present. The Attitude Era, he ushered in one of the greatest eras in professional wrestling. I don't say this as being an Attitude Era remark growing up from that era, but it is a fact. You can say what you want. The wrestling might not be as good then as it is now, because everyone does kicks and flips and whatnot. But there's a reason why the Attitude Era was one of the greatest eras of all time. I mean, that's an era of wrestling that is woven into pop culture. Literally. The Ruthless Aggression era was great for what it was. But when you get a lot of wrestling fans to talk about wrestling or reminisce on wrestling, they don't talk about Ruthless Aggression. Ruthless Aggression was not a boom period. Was not part of a boom period. The Attitude Era was. So there's a reason why people are very fond of that era. One of the greatest eras of all time. Still, he had speared that. Cool. But made the WWE Network, which I think is one of the greatest, ideas Vince McMahon has ever had in his company in the last 10 years, was the conceptual idea of having all their content thrown on the network subscription fee for $10. Can't beat it. However, Vince McMahon is out of touch, and Vince McMahon needs to step away. For as much success Vince McMahon has brought to his company, the WWE, he is also hurting it as well. They're making money, and I've said this plenty of times. WWE are making more money than they ever have financially, hand over fist, between the deals with Saudi Arabia and the Fox money, and the renewal of their deal with Raw on USA they did a couple years ago. Their $50 million or whatever increase that they made this last quarter due to them firing a lot of wrestlers. They make so much money out their ass they don't know what to do with it than they've ever had in this company's history. But the trade-off for that, though, is their creativity. So they make a lot of money, but creatively, they're just creatively bankrupt. And a lot of that does fall on Vince McMahon. Sorry. It is what it is. I don't know, coming out of this pandemic era, I don't know how this would affect WWE moving forward. I don't know if the numbers are going to go up back to how it was, what was it last year? In the 3 million range, maybe 2 million range. I think this has been coming for a long time. The pandemic just kind of sped things up a little bit for WWE. It is what it is with that. I could talk more. I will talk more. But I'm just going to leave my piece on this with WWE. Switching gears, AEW. Now, I would say, unlike WWE, I think this pandemic hurts AEW a lot more. 2 reasons. A, AEW is only a year old. It is a brand new company still that's getting its momentum. Or I don't think the momentum for AEW has fizzled. I think the pandemic has kind of hurt some of its momentum, because I think AEW, from late last year to the criticism that they had throughout that month of December, they kicked it up this year. They kicked off 2020 with a bang this year. I mean, every show, every week was red hot for AEW kicking off this year. Wasn't until the pandemic hit, after the Revolution pay per view in February, that's when the momentum kind of. I don't think the momentum for AEW is gone, because they still put on enjoyable shows, but I just think it's stagnant just a little bit. So this pandemic, I think, hurts them a lot more so than WWE, because, again, like I said, they are only a year old. Um, you could say for NXT the same as for AEW, in that the audience and the crowd played a huge part of AEW and making it an enjoyable product, and really made it feel like, a second big league alternative company to WWE. And now that we don't have that audience, it's like AEW is still great, but that one other ingredient that, made the whole, recipe for AEW great, that key ingredient, I should say, is missing. And I think once things kind of normalize and get back to normal, somewhat, because I don't think anything is going to really go back to how it was, in 2019 for the next, like, 2 years. That's just my personal opinion. I hope I'm wrong on that, but I just think the new normal is going to be, it's going to be a while. Like, shit ain't going to get back to how it was last year, probably until, like, 2022, 2023. Sucks ass, but that's how I just see it going. However, despite all that, though, AEW's been putting on some great shows during their pandemic. They've had a few shows that have been kind of like, kind of weak or whatnot, but AEW to me have been putting on the more entertaining shows. Unlike Raw and SmackDown, that catch me on the highlights, AEW, Dynamite, and even NXT, those two wrestling shows I watch live, or if I have the time, I will watch it live. But I make it Wednesday night, I watch AEW. Even if I'm, like, working during its airing, I come home, I watch AEW on a Wednesday night, set on my DVR, and then I'll watch NXT right after, or I'll watch it the next day. But those are the two wrestling shows I will watch consistently from beginning to end during this pandemic era, because they're the only ones that are still putting on good shows. Impact Wrestling is putting on decent shows. There are some things I'll get into Impact in a second here. But as far as AEW to me, I think has been great. The signing of Christian Cage, and Taz being his manager, and Taz bringing back the FTW heavyweight title, I thought was cool. A lot of people wasn't really, like, here for it, but I also know quite a few people as well, kind of, like, marked out for it too, like the old school ECW guys, like, marked out for it. I thought that was pretty cool. MJF, the guy has been dynamite, pun intended. The promo that he cut a week ago, last Wednesday, was absolutely awesome. I'm loving this whole campaign, run, promo gimmick thing that he's got leading up to his match with Jon Moxley, at All Out in a couple of weeks, 3 weeks. So, like, yeah, I think AEW has been put on some good shows. They've been putting on some good wrestling matches in spite of this pandemic. I know a lot of people think that AEW have been kind of, and I'll mention this here. A lot of people think that AEW have been kind of misusing some talent. Like Brian Cage, for example. Some people didn't like the fact that Brian Cage lost, or they didn't like how he lost, and felt that it hurt him. I've heard both sides of the spectrum, and I think some people have valid points as to why they didn't like that ending and how they think it hurts Cage. I don't think it was detrimental to Brian Cage. I mean, yes, they build up Cage for 3 weeks, but within those 3 weeks of them building up Brian Cage, or 4 weeks or whatever, did anyone in their right mind thought that Brian Cage was gonna beat Jon Moxley for the heavyweight title? I sure didn't. So I think there were a lot of people that actually thought that they were going to give the belt to Brian Cage. I don't think I didn't that wasn't that never crossed my mind. I didn't think so. So maybe for me, when he lost in the fashion that he did, I didn't think it really hurt Cage or his credibility. Like Disco Inferno and the others from I forgot the name of the podcast, but how they described it. But I think Brian Cage is fine. I think it's fine. They gave him a belt just to cushion his blow from him losing to Moxley. So once that happened, I knew he wasn't gonna win anyway. What's some other stuff? FTR, formerly known as the Revival, coming into AEW, which apparently I'm hearing that they were on like a handshake deal or something like that. They're not really exclusively signed to AEW, so I don't know the legalities with FTR and their workings with AEW, but I mean I think they've been great. I think they've been a great acquisition to the roster. I hope that they stay in AEW, even though they've talked about working, everywhere else in Impact and Japan and excuse me, everywhere else. AEW to me has just been exciting, and it's just been a much more overall better show to watch. Impact Wrestling, they have their moments. I will watch Impact for sure. I kind of tuned out a little bit when they made Tessa the world champion. I have my opinions on that. I didn't agree with that at all. Tessa being world champion in the men's division, I think that was stupid. And for those who say, oh, well, they did it, to get them some buzz and blah, blah, blah. Well, look at what that buzz got them, with because they end up firing Tessa Blanchard at the end of the day. So, like, look at where they got them. But still, Impact Wrestling, and now since the Slammiversary pay-per-view coming out of that, a few weeks ago, which was a solid pay-per-view. If I was to compare what pay-per-view was better between that or the horror show Extreme Rules from WWE that aired that same weekend, Impact had the much better wrestling show that weekend. I'm not going to even fake the funk on that. They had a much more enjoyable pay-per-view to me. There were like 2 matches on Slammiversary that was kind of like but in its entirety, I had more of an enjoyable time watching Slammiversary over WWE's Extreme Rules pay-per-view. But that's besides the point. So yeah, there's that. Impact has been putting on some pretty good shows. A couple of segments I'm not too fond of from Impact. I think I think it's called not Full House, Wrestle House or something like that, which is kind of like a comedic skit thing. It has potential. It is kind of entertaining, but I think it takes up too much time of a 2-hour formatted show where Impact does they do the weekly throwback match of the week or whatever. That takes about 10 minutes, and then you get 60% of this new Wrestle House segment stuff sprinkled throughout the rest of the show. So you only have 30-35% of the raw taped new footage from their recordings that's being aired. So that kind of sucky. But other than that, I'll even watch Impact Wrestling in its entirety over Raw and SmackDown right now. So yeah, this is just my thoughts right now on this whole pandemic era stuff. I'm going to be making more wrestling videos once I'm done with this one, and I'm going to be uploading them throughout the week. But this is going to be the first one. So you guys let me know what you think about the pandemic era of wrestling. Have you tuned out of wrestling altogether and not watching any wrestling at all? Or are you still, like me, watching everything, or at least watching what you can or what interests you? And who do you think has been putting on the best empty arena shows? AEW, WWE, NXT, Well, when I say WWE, I'm counting all three of its brands: SmackDown, Raw, NXT, AEW Dynamite, Impact Wrestling, or even New Japan. This pandemic era is definitely one's going to affect for sure is NWA. I've been hearing some stuff that NWA cannot operate. Uh, there's no way they can financially. Billy Corgan cannot financially sustain NWA under the current conditions that we have right now due to this pandemic. So between that and then the whole Speak Out movement thing and allegations that came against Dave Lagana, who's the vice president of NWA, and he dropped out and left the company. NWA could be in some big trouble in terms of it surviving this pandemic era. NWA could be dead, and if NWA dies, it sucks because it was enjoyable. It was an enjoyable weekly watch on YouTube for a wrestling show. They had their own little niche that they were carving out, and they were doing a good job at it. But if they do end up falling, it'll be unfortunate, but it would free up a lot of talent as well. Um, and there's quite a few places I like to see some talent. Maybe I'll make a video on that. So there's that, and then MLW, Major League Wrestling. They're supposed to be starting back up operations, I believe, in November. They're going to be doing empty arena matches or shows. So you guys let me know what you think. My favorite show or show to watch during this pandemic: AEW first, followed by NXT. You guys let me know what you think in the box below. Do yourself a favor, like this video, and subscribe, and comment. Peace out.